The mahogany conference table in the high-rise office reflected the gray Chicago skyline, capturing the exact moment a marriage dissolved into a spreadsheet of assets and liabilities. Daniel watched his wife of 7 years fight tooth and nail for the summer house and the investment portfolio. Yet when the topic of custody arose, her silence was louder than the storm battering the windows. It wasn't just that she wanted the money. It was the chilling ease with which she traded her role as a mother for a clean slate, unaware that some signatures carve scars that no amount of alimony can heal. If the quiet disintegration of a family and the complex, often painful choices people make behind closed doors resonate with you, stay with me. There are truths hidden in the ink of these divorce papers that are just beginning to surface. And if you want to see where the path of ambition truly leads, don't turn away. The air in the conference room on the 42nd floor was thin, recycled, and smelled faintly of expensive coffee and aggressive cologne. Outside, Chicago was weeping, a relentless gray November rain that blurred the city lights into streaks of cold neon. Inside, the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of a Mont Blanc pen against a leather notebook. Daniel sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap, the knuckles white. He hadn't looked at his wife, Elena, for the better part of an hour. He was afraid that if he did, the composure he was fighting so hard to maintain would shatter. "To clarify," Elena's lawyer said, his voice smooth and detached, like a surgeon outlining a routine amputation. "My client requires the liquidation of the joint investment portfolio, full ownership of the Lake Forest property, and 80% of the sale proceeds from the marital home." Daniel's attorney, a weary woman named Sarah, who had seen too many of these afternoons, adjusted her glasses. "That leaves Daniel with less than enough to put a deposit on a rental in the city. You're asking him to restart his life with zero capital, while he is the one." "The financial division is non-negotiable," Elena cut in. Her voice was steady, the same tone she used to dismantle witnesses in court. She finally turned her head, her gaze sweeping over Daniel not with hatred, but with a chilling indifference. "I earned the majority of that capital, Daniel. It's only fair." "Fair," Daniel whispered. The word tasted like ash. "We built that life so we could raise a family, together. And now we are unbuilding it," Elena replied, checking her watch. "I have a briefing at 4. Can we move to the custody arrangement?" The room seemed to drop in temperature. This was the moment Daniel had been dreading. He had prepared himself for a war. He had gathered character references, schedules, and school reports, ready to fight for every weekend, every holiday. "Daniel can have him," Elena said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even her own lawyer blinked, momentarily losing his professional mask. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes wide. "What?" "Leo," Elena said, saying their son's name as if it were a logistical hurdle she had just cleared. "He needs stability, Daniel. You've always been the domestic one. My firm is putting me on the partner track for the New York expansion next year. I can't be dragging a 6-year-old between cities and nannies. It's not practical." "Practical?" Daniel's voice cracked. He stood up, the chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. "We are talking about our son, Elena, not a piece of furniture you can't fit in the moving van." "I am being realistic," she countered, her expression tightening. She didn't look at the photo of Leo that Daniel knew she used to keep as her phone background. He noticed she had changed it to a generic abstract wallpaper. "I will pay the state-mandated child support. I won't contest your full physical and legal custody. You get what you always wanted, to be the dad of the year. I get my career." She pushed the stack of documents toward him across the mahogany table. "Sign it. Daniel, take the boy, give me the assets, and let's be done." Daniel looked down at the papers. The trade was laid out in black and white. She was buying her freedom with their son's future. She was cashing out of motherhood. He looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman who had once cried when Leo took his first steps. He found only a stranger in a tailored suit, checking her notifications on the table. "You have no idea what you're actually giving up," Daniel said softly. "I'm giving up the headache, Daniel. I'm taking the life I deserve." Daniel picked up the pen. He didn't fight for the money. He didn't fight for the house. He signed his name next to the clause that gave him sole custody of Leo, sealing the pact. He had lost everything that had a price tag, but as he walked out of that cold, glass tower into the rain, he knew he was the only one leaving with anything of value. Elena didn't watch him go. She was already on the phone. 2 weeks later, the physical separation of their lives was as absolute as the legal one. In the Gold Coast district, 30 stories above the street, the air was conditioned to a crisp, odorless perfection. Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new penthouse, a flute of vintage Krug champagne dangling loosely from her fingers. The view was commanding, a sprawling grid of lights that made the cars below look like insignificant toys. Behind her, the space was an ode to minimalism. White leather sofas, glass tables, and abstract art that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. There were no tripping hazards here, no stray Lego bricks embedded in the carpet, no sticky handprints on the sliding doors, no mountains of primary colored plastic cluttering the visual field. "To the closing," Julian said, coming up behind her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, the wool of his suit scratching slightly against the silk of her dress. "And to the new merger." Elena leaned back into him, closing her eyes. It was quiet. That was the first thing she had noticed when the movers finished. The profound, luxurious silence. For 6 years, her life had been a cacophony of demands, cries, cartoons, and Daniel's constant cloying attempts at family time. Now the silence felt like oxygen. "It's perfect," she murmured, turning to kiss him. "Everything is exactly where it belongs." Miles away, in a walk-up building in Rogers Park, where the hallway smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and damp wool, Daniel was wrestling a mattress up a narrow flight of stairs. "Careful, buddy, stay behind me," Daniel grunted, heaving the twin mattress around a tight corner. Leo stood on the landing below, clutching a worn, stuffed beagle by the ear. The boy looked small in the dim hallway light, his eyes wide and scanning the peeling paint on the banister. This wasn't the sprawling suburban home with the oak tree in the backyard. This was a second-floor unit with rattling radiators and a view of a brick wall. "Daddy, is this the hotel?" Leo asked, his voice trembling slightly. Daniel set the mattress down inside the small bedroom, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He forced a smile, crouching down to be at eye level with his son. "No, Leo. Remember what we talked about? This is our new adventure base. Just you and me. Like Batman and Robin in the Batcave." Leo stepped into the room. It was tight. The bed would take up most of the floor space. He looked around, checking the corners, waiting for the rest of the moving crew to arrive. "Where is Mommy's room?" The question hung in the stagnant air of the apartment, heavier than the furniture Daniel had been hauling all day. Daniel felt a physical ache in his chest, a sharp constriction that made it hard to breathe. He had rehearsed this. He had read the books on co-parenting and transition. But looking at Leo's hopeful, confused face, the script evaporated. Mommy has her own house now, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady, keeping the tremor out. She needs to be close to her work. But this is our place. Leo frowned, processing the logic of a 6-year-old. But she's coming for dinner? It's Tuesday. We have tacos on Tuesday. Daniel reached out and smoothed Leo's hair, which was damp from the drizzle outside. Not tonight, Leo. Tonight we're going to order pizza. Any kind you want. Even the one with the extra cheese. Leo didn't cheer. He just nodded, a slow, solemn movement that seemed too old for his age. He walked over to the window and looked out at the alleyway, clutching the beagle tighter. Back in the penthouse, Elena sat on the white sofa, scrolling through her phone. She paused on a photo in her camera roll, a picture of the empty nursery in the old house, now cleared out. For a split second, a phantom sensation brushed against her memory, the weight of a small body asleep on her chest. Everything okay? Julian asked from the kitchen island, pouring another drink. Elena swiped the photo away and locked the screen. The screen went black, erasing the past. Never better, she said, and she took a sip of champagne, letting the cold bubbles wash away the sudden, inconvenient thought. I was just thinking about what to do with the extra room. A home gym, maybe. Or a library. Whatever you want, Julian smiled. It's your space now. Yes, Elena whispered, looking at the pristine, empty room down the hall. It's finally mine. In the cramped apartment, Daniel sat on the floor amidst a fortress of cardboard boxes, watching Leo sleep on the unmade bed. The city sounds, sirens, shouting, the rumble of the L train, were loud, but inside the room, the silence was heavy with absence. Daniel reached for his phone, tempted to text her, to tell her that Leo had asked for her. He typed out the message, "He misses you." He stared at the cursor, blinking for a long time. Then, remembering the cold indifference in the conference room, the way she had negotiated their son like a liability, he deleted it. He tossed the phone onto the floor and leaned his head back against the wall, listening to the rhythm of his son's breathing, the only sound that kept the darkness at bay. 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The biting Chicago winter had thawed into a wet, gray spring, washing away the last remnants of the life Daniel and Elena had shared. In the small apartment in Rogers Park, new routines had calcified. There was a rhythm to the mornings now, oatmeal, cartoons, the rush to catch the school bus, that no longer felt like a temporary emergency, but simply life. Today, however, the routine was broken. It was Leo's 7th birthday. Daniel had woken up early to hang streamers from the low ceiling of the kitchen. He had saved for weeks to buy the second-hand bicycle hidden in the closet, a gift that required him to skip lunch breaks to afford. The air in the apartment smelled of burnt sugar and anticipation as he stacked pancakes onto a plate. At 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. It wasn't a guest. It was a uniformed courier, looking out of place in the dimly lit hallway, holding a sleek, silver-wrapped box with a silk ribbon. "Delivery for Leo," the man said, checking his clipboard. Daniel signed for it, the pen feeling heavy in his hand. He brought the box inside. It was light, precise, and expensive. There was no card, just a tag printed in elegant font. From Mother. Leo sat at the small kitchen table, his eyes lighting up briefly as he tore the paper. Inside was the latest tablet model, a device that cost more than Daniel's rent for the month. It was preloaded with games and educational apps. It was a perfect, cold, technological pacifier. Did Mommy bring this? Leo asked, looking at the door, expecting her to follow the gift. No, bud. She sent it, Daniel said, his throat tight. She's working very hard. Leo touched the cold glass screen. He didn't turn it on. He just pushed it slightly to the side, next to his plate of pancakes. Is she coming for the cake tonight? Daniel hesitated. He had texted Elena 3 times that week. He had emailed her assistant. The response had been a calendar invite rejection, conflict, charity gala. I don't think so, Leo. She has a big meeting. That evening, the apartment was filled with the chaotic noise of 3 boys from Leo's class. There was pizza, cheap soda, and loud laughter. Daniel tried to keep the energy high, to fill the void with noise. But every time the phone in Daniel's pocket buzzed, Leo's eyes would dart toward him, sharp and waiting. Across the city, under the crystal chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, Elena adjusted the strap of her emerald gown. The gala was the event of the season, a fundraiser for the arts that served as a networking shark tank for the city's elite. Julian was at her side, charming a judge, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Elena smiled, nodded, and sipped her wine, but a low-level hum of anxiety vibrated beneath her skin. She knew what day it was. She had set the reminder on her phone weeks ago, delegated the gift purchase to her secretary, and ensured it arrived on time. She had done her duty. Her phone vibrated in her clutch. Daniel calling. She frowned, stepping away from the circle of donors. She moved to a quieter alcove near the restrooms. Daniel, I can't talk right now, she answered, her voice hushed but sharp. I'm in the middle of the silent auction. It's 7:30, Elena. Daniel's voice came through, tinny and distant. We're about to cut the cake. I thought, maybe you could just say hello. Speakerphone. 2 minutes. Elena looked back at the ballroom. Julian was waving her over. The managing partner of the firm had just arrived. This was the FaceTime she needed for the promotion. I can't, Daniel. It's too loud here. I'll call him tomorrow. Tell him I hope he likes the iPad. Elena, he doesn't want the iPad. He wants... I have to go, she said, and she pressed the red icon. The connection severed. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and walked back into the light, putting the phone away. Back in the apartment, Daniel stared at the screen for a moment, before sliding the phone back into his pocket. The room had gone quiet. The other boys were watching. Leo was sitting in front of the chocolate cake, the 7 candles burning down, wax dripping onto the icing. Was that her? Leo asked. His voice was flat. There was no tremble this time. Daniel walked over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. He couldn't lie. He wouldn't give false hope. She couldn't get away, Leo. She's busy. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Daniel braced himself for tears, for the wailing cry of a child who feels abandoned. But Leo didn't cry. He looked at the candles, the flame reflecting in eyes that seemed suddenly older, darker. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look at the phone. He simply nodded, a small, decisive motion. Okay, Leo said softly. He leaned forward and blew out the candles in one breath. The smoke curled up into the air, gray and vanishing, just like the expectation he had finally let go of. He picked up the plastic knife and cut the first slice himself, not waiting for anyone else to do it. The dinner party was a masterpiece of curation. Elena had hired a private chef to prepare a 6-course tasting menu, and the dining room of the penthouse was filled with the soft clink of silver against bone china and the low, confident hum of power brokers discussing mergers. The view of Chicago at night served as the perfect backdrop, distant, glittering, and safely removed behind triple-paned glass. Elena sat at the head of the table, wearing a dress that cost more than Daniel's car. She swirled the Pinot Noir in her glass, watching Julian hold court at the other end. He was charismatic, undeniably. He told stories with the perfect cadence, making the other partners laugh at exactly the right moments. For months, this had been enough. The shared ambition, the mutual understanding of billable hours and corporate warfare, the freedom to travel without arranging babysitters. But really, Julian was saying, leaning back in his chair, his face flushed with wine and success. Thompson is out of his mind, taking 3 months of paternity leave in the middle of the acquisition. A ripple of amused disbelief went through the table. 3 months, one of the associates scoffed. Is he breastfeeding the kid himself? Laughter bubbled up, sharp and brittle. Elena forced a smile, but it felt tight on her face. Usually, she would have joined in. She would have made a witty remark about commitment or focus. But tonight, the wine tasted acidic. It's just a matter of priorities, Julian continued, gesturing with his fork. You either want the chair, or you want to change diapers. You can't pretend to be a killer in the courtroom if you're worried about a toddler's fever at home. Children are basically anchors. Cute, sure, but they drag you to the bottom. The table nodded in agreement. Anchors, someone echoed. Elena's hand froze on the stem of her glass. Anchors. She looked at Julian. He wasn't looking at her. He was basking in the validation of his peers. For the first time, she saw the cruelty in the set of his mouth, the emptiness behind his polished veneer. She realized with a sudden sinking dread that he wasn't just talking about Thompson. He was talking about her life, or rather, the part of her life she had amputated to be here. She had convinced herself that leaving Leo was a sacrifice, a noble decision to give him stability while she secured their financial future. But hearing Julian describe a child, her child, as an anchor made her stomach turn. It stripped away the noble narrative and left only the cold, selfish truth. Elena? She blinked, snapping back to the room. Julian was looking at her, eyebrows raised. I was just saying, we're lucky we don't have that baggage anymore. Right? The room went quiet, waiting for the hostess to agree. This was her cue. She was supposed to toast to their freedom. Right, she said. Her voice was steady, but it sounded hollow to her own ears. Lucky. She took a long sip of wine to drown the sudden memory of Leo's small, warm hand gripping her finger when he was scared. An anchor didn't just drag you down, it kept you from drifting away. Without it, she suddenly felt untethered, floating in a dark, cold sea. Later that night, after the guests had left and the caterers had cleared the debris, the penthouse returned to its immaculate state. Julian loosened his tie, pouring himself a nightcap. Great night, he said, satisfied. I think we locked down the Kensington vote. He walked over to her, expecting a kiss, a celebration. Elena stood by the window, staring out at the void. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched. A microscopic movement, but he felt it. What's wrong? He asked, his tone shifting from charm to irritation. Nothing, Elena lied, pulling away. She walked toward the master bedroom, the click of her heels echoing on the marble floor. I just have a headache. She closed the door behind her, shutting him out. She sat on the edge of the massive, empty bed and looked at her phone. She navigated to the Photos app, scrolling back months, past the gala photos, past the vacation shots, until she found a blurry video from a year ago. It was Leo, laughing in the backyard of the old house, chasing fireflies. She played it on silent. The laughter was trapped behind the glass, just like she was. The letter on Daniel's kitchen table was printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. It was an acquisition offer from a massive property development firm, the kind that paved over wetlands to build strip malls. The number at the bottom of the page was substantial, enough to pay off the debts from the divorce, move them out of the cramped apartment, and maybe even start a college fund for Leo. Daniel stared at the zeros, rubbing his tired eyes. It was 1 odd a.m. The only light came from the buzzing fluorescent tube above the sink. The catch was in the fine print. The position came with a mandatory 60-hour work week and extensive travel during the peak season. He looked toward the bedroom door, slightly ajar. He could hear the soft, rhythmic whistle of Leo's breathing. If he took the money, he could buy Leo the things Elena could afford: the new clothes, the camps, the comfort. But he would become a ghost in his son's life, a provider who was never present. He picked up a red pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. Then, he remembered the way Leo had looked at him that morning while tying his shoes, a look of absolute, unquestioning trust that his father would be there at 3 p.m. for pickup. Daniel capped the pen. He didn't sign. He folded the offer letter and shoved it into the recycling bin. He would sell his truck first. He would take on freelance drafting work at night. He would bleed himself dry before he sold the hours he had with his son. Across the city, the champagne corks were popping with the violence of gunshots. Elena stood in the center of the firm's main boardroom, surrounded by a phalanx of partners and associates. They had won the Harrison case. It was a verdict that would be written up in the Wall Street Journal, a settlement so large it secured the firm's quarterly targets in a single afternoon. "To the Queen of the Kill!" a junior associate shouted, raising a glass. "To Elena!" The room roared back. Elena smiled, accepting the crystal flute thrust into her hand. The adrenaline that usually followed a win like this, the electric hum of validation, was strangely absent. Instead, she felt a numbness spreading from her chest to her fingertips. She looked around the room. These people respected her. They feared her, but not a single one of them knew how she took her coffee or what she was afraid of in the dark. She looked for Julian. He was in the corner, deep in conversation with the managing partner, already leveraging her victory for his own political capital within the firm. He caught her eye and gave a thumbs up, a gesture so casual and transactional it made her stomach turn. "Excuse me," Elena murmured, slipping away from the back-slapping crowd. She retreated to her corner office and closed the heavy glass door, muffling the celebration into a dull roar. The city lights of Chicago stretched out before her, a sea of indifference. She sat down in her ergonomically perfect chair and placed the champagne glass on the desk. She picked up her phone. She wanted to call someone. She wanted to say, "I did it. I won." She scrolled through her contacts. Her parents were in Florida and only cared if she was visiting. Her college friends had drifted away years ago, alienated by her schedule. And Daniel was the only one who used to understand the cost of these wins. He used to have a bottle of cheap wine and a foot rub waiting for her, grounding her back to earth. Now she had the expensive wine and the view, but no earth to stand on. A notification popped up from LinkedIn. "Congratulations on your work anniversary." Elena let the phone drop to the desk. The silence in her office was absolute, heavier than the noise of the party outside. She had reached the summit she had climbed so ruthlessly to attain, only to discover that the air up here was too thin to breathe. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday afternoon at a park along the lakefront, a neutral territory agreed upon after 3 days of tense text exchanges. Elena arrived 15 minutes early. She was dressed in a camel hair coat that had been featured in Vogue, and she sat on a park bench with the posture of someone waiting for a deposition, not a playdate. Beside her sat a shopping bag from a high-end toy store, a prop she hoped would bridge the 6-month gap in conversation. She checked her watch. The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, messing with her blowout. She felt a flicker of irritation. Why couldn't they meet at a bistro? But pushed it down. Today was about quality time. She had carved out exactly 2 hours in her schedule between a brunch with a client and a flight to New York. She was ready to be a mother again, efficiently and affectionately. When she saw them approaching, her breath hitched. Daniel looked tired, wearing a faded denim jacket and boots that had seen better days, but he walked with a steady, grounded rhythm. Holding his hand, keeping pace with a skip in his step, was Leo. He looked taller. His hair was cut differently, shorter on the sides. He was wearing a superhero backpack she didn't recognize. "Leo," Elena called out, forcing a bright, cinematic smile. She stood up, smoothing her coat. "Look who's here!" She expected a run, a sprint, a collision of small arms around her waist. That was how it happened in the movies. That was how it used to happen when she came home late from the office. But Leo didn't run. He stopped walking. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes wide and questioning, as if asking for permission or perhaps clarification on who this woman was. Daniel squeezed the boy's hand gently and leaned down. "It's okay, Leo. Go say hi to Mom." Leo walked forward slowly. There was no skip in his step now. He stopped 3 feet away from her, just out of reach. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was polite, quiet, and utterly devoid of intimacy. It was the voice a child uses for a dentist or a distant aunt. Elena's smile faltered. She stepped forward and crouched down, disregarding the dirt on her expensive boots. "I missed you so much, sweetie. Look, I brought you something." She pulled out the limited edition robot from the bag. It was complex, expensive, and flashy. Leo took it. "Thank you," he said. He didn't tear open the box. He didn't gasp. He just held it awkwardly against his chest. "I have a robot at home. Dad built it with me. It's made of soup cans." "Oh," Elena said, her hand hovering in the air, unsure where to land. She wanted to touch his cheek, but the distance between them felt like a force field. "Well, this one has a remote control. It walks." "That's nice," Leo said. He turned his head, looking back at the playground where other kids were screaming and hanging off the monkey bars. "Dad, can I go on the slide?" Elena stood up, a flush of heat rising in her neck that had nothing to do with the wind. "Leo, I just got here. Don't you want to tell me about school or your friends?" Leo looked at her, blinking. "School is fine. I like math now." "Math? You used to hate math," Elena laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Dad makes it fun. We count cars," Leo stated simply. He shifted his weight, restless. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He was just bored. To him, she was an interruption to his Saturday, not the center of his world. Daniel stepped in, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look triumphant. He looked sad. "He's been looking forward to the slide all week, Elena. Maybe walk with him over there." "I'm not wearing the right shoes for the mulch," she snapped, then instantly regretted it. She saw the look on Daniel's face. a mixture of pity and resignation. She looked at Leo. He was already drifting away, his body angled toward the playground, toward the life that Daniel had built for him, brick by brick, while she was building her portfolio. "Go ahead, buddy," Daniel said softly. Leo didn't hesitate. He handed the expensive robot back to Elena. "Can you hold this? It's heavy." And then he ran. He ran away from her, toward the rusty slide, laughing as he joined a group of strangers. Elena stood there, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face, holding a $300 toy that her son didn't want. She looked at Daniel. "He doesn't even know me," she whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "He knows you, Elena," Daniel said quietly, watching their son climb the ladder. "He just doesn't need you anymore. You taught him that." The conference room in the New York satellite office was soundproof, designed to keep the chaos of Manhattan at bay. Elena was 20 minutes into her closing argument for the merger when her phone, placed face down on the table, began to vibrate. It wasn't a standard notification. It was the persistent, rhythmic buzzing of a call that wouldn't go to voicemail. She frowned, breaking her cadence. She flipped the phone over. Daniel. She silenced it. She was in the middle of a sentence that was worth $4 million. It rang again immediately. Then a text popped up, visible on the lock screen. "ER. Northwestern. Anaphylaxis. Hurry." The air left the room. Elena didn't excuse herself. She simply stopped talking. She grabbed her bag, leaving her notes, her tablet, and the stunned board members behind, sprinting toward the elevators in her stilettos. The flight back to Chicago was a blur of white noise and terrifying imagination. By the time her Uber screeched to a halt outside the emergency room entrance, it was raining again. She ran through the automatic doors, her designer suit damp, her hair wild, looking like a frantic disruption in the sterile, fluorescent calm of the hospital lobby. Leo Vance," she demanded at the nurse's station, her chest heaving. "He was brought in an hour ago." The nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a thick binder, didn't look up immediately. She typed something into the computer. "Pediatric observation. Room 402. Are you a relative?" "I'm his mother," Elena snapped, the word feeling jagged in her throat. The nurse finally looked up. She scanned Elena's appearance, the sharp, tailored blazer, the diamond studs, the aura of a boardroom rather than a playroom. Then she looked back at the screen. "Dr. Vance is already with him. You'll need a visitor's pass." Dr. Vance? Daniel. The nurse had assumed the man in the room was the doctor, or perhaps she just meant Daniel was handling it. But the phrase, "visitor's pass," hit Elena like a physical slap. She didn't argue. She snatched the sticker, slapped it onto her wet lapel, and ran down the corridor. Room 402 was quiet. The curtains were drawn. Elena burst in, ready to take charge, ready to demand the best specialists, ready to pay for whatever was needed. "I'm here," she announced, her voice breathless. "I'm here." The scene before her froze her in the doorway. Leo was lying in the hospital bed, looking incredibly small against the white sheets. An IV line was taped to his hand. His face was puffy, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. But he wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at Daniel. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, his body curved protectively around their son. He was murmuring something low and rhythmic, a story or a song, his hand stroking Leo's hair with a practiced, soothing motion. At the sound of Elena's voice, Leo flinched. He didn't reach for her. He shrank back into Daniel's side, gripping his father's shirt with a desperation that broke Elena's heart. "It's okay, Leo," Daniel said, not looking at Elena yet. It's just Mom. Just Mom. The title sounded like a demotion. Elena stepped forward, her heels clicking too loudly on the linoleum. What happened? Was it the peanuts? I told the school to check the... It was a bee sting, Elena, Daniel said quietly. He finally looked at her. His eyes were hard, tired, and devoid of the patience he used to have for her. At the park. He's allergic to bees. We found out today. I didn't know, Elena stammered. She reached out to touch Leo's foot, covered by the hospital blanket. Leo pulled his leg away. I want Daddy, he whined, his voice raspy from the reaction. Daddy's right here, Daniel soothed, ignoring Elena's hand hovering in the air. I'm not going anywhere. A nurse bustled in, a different one, holding a chart. She glanced at Daniel, then at Elena. She smiled warmly at Daniel. He's stabilizing nicely, Dad. You did great with the EpiPen, good instincts. Then she turned to Elena, her smile fading into professional politeness. Ma'am, try not to crowd the bed. He needs to keep his heart rate down. Elena backed away until her back hit the cold wall. She stood there in her power suit, clutching her thousands of dollars bag, watching the tableau of a family that didn't include her. Daniel knew how to hold him. Daniel knew the doctors. Daniel had saved him. She realized then that she could sue for custody. She could buy the hospital wing. She could argue her case before the Supreme Court. But she could not litigate her way into that bed. She was the mother on the birth certificate. But in this room, she was just a woman wearing a visitor's pass. The rain had finally stopped by the time they reached Rogers Park, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. Elena had insisted on driving them home from the hospital, her luxury sedan gliding silently over potholes that would have rattled Daniel's truck. Daniel sat in the back seat with Leo, who had finally fallen asleep, his head resting heavy and warm against his father's chest. Elena watched them through the rearview mirror, her eyes constantly darting to the reflection of the boy she had birthed, but no longer knew how to comfort. When the car purred to a halt in front of the brick walk-up, the silence in the cabin was suffocating. I'll carry him up, Daniel whispered, unbuckling his seatbelt with practiced quietness so as not to wake his son. I'll wait, Elena said. Her voice was uncharacteristically thin. I want to make sure you get inside. Daniel didn't argue. He hoisted Leo into his arms, the boy's limbs draping over him with the total, boneless relaxation of a child who feels completely safe. He carried him up the front steps, disappeared into the building, and the light in the second-floor window flickered on a moment later. Elena stood on the sidewalk, leaning against the cold metal of her car. She pulled a checkbook from her purse. She had already filled out the line, adding a 0, then another. It was a staggering amount. It was enough to buy a house in the suburbs. It was enough to pay for private schools, therapists, vacations. It was an apology written in the only language she spoke fluently. 10 minutes later, the front door opened, and Daniel emerged. He wasn't wearing a coat. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the emergency room fading into the bone-deep weariness of a single parent. He's tucked in, Daniel said, stopping a few feet away from her. He's asking for water, but he's okay. Good, Elena nodded. She held out the check. Daniel, take this. Daniel looked at the slip of paper fluttering in the night breeze. He didn't reach for it. What is this? It's for the medical bills, she said quickly. And for whatever else. Get a better apartment. Get him a new bike. Just take it. Daniel looked at her. really looked at her, for the first time in months. He saw the panic in her eyes, not the panic of a mother fearing for her child's life, but the panic of a powerful woman realizing she is powerless. She was trying to balance the books. She was trying to pay a retrospective invoice for the affection she hadn't provided. "We have insurance, Elena," Daniel said softly. "And we like this apartment. It's warm. The neighbors know us." "Don't be stubborn," she snapped, her composure cracking. "I have the money. I have everything. Why should he live like this when I can provide more?" "You do have everything," Daniel agreed. His voice wasn't angry. It was filled with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "You got the portfolio. You got the lake house. You got the partner track. You got exactly what you asked for in that conference room." He took a step back, moving toward the warmth of the building. "But you can't buy your way out of the fact that he didn't want you today," Daniel said. "You traded him, Elena. You made a deal. And now you have to live with the profit." "I did it for us," she cried out, the desperation rising. "I did it so I wouldn't resent him." "Well," Daniel said, placing his hand on the door handle, "you don't have to resent him. And he doesn't have to miss you. He has me. He has a home." "Daniel, please," she whispered, the check trembling in her hand. "Good night, Elena," he said. He stepped inside and closed the door. The latch clicked, a small, final sound that echoed loudly in the empty street. Elena stood alone under the street lamp. She looked down at the check in her hand, a piece of paper worth a fortune that couldn't buy her a single second of the peace she saw in Daniel's eyes. She looked up at the window on the second floor. She saw the shadow of Daniel moving across the room, saw him sit by the bed, saw the silhouette of her son reach up to hold his father's hand. She had demanded everything in the divorce, and standing there in the cold, surrounding by her luxury and her freedom, she realized she had walked away with absolutely nothing. Elena crushed the check in her fist, got back into her silent, expensive car, and drove back to the penthouse that was perfectly, terrifyingly empty.